A reading from The Shadow of the Galilean by Gerd Theissen. The narrator is a fictional character called Andreas. The cell was dark. Only a few moments ago people had been thronging around me in a panic. Now I was alone. My head was throbbing, my limbs hurt. The soldiers had looked innocuous. They had joined in the demonstration and the shouting. No one could have guessed that they had been planted there until they took out their concealed clubs and hit us with them. Most of us fled. Some were trampled to death in the rush, others were knocked down by the blows of the soldiers. There had been no reason for me to run. After all, I was there simply by chance with Timon and Malchus. I hadn't been interested in the demonstration. I was interested in Barabbas, whom I had noticed among the demonstrators. I was trying to get to him when panic broke out, and everything turned into a confused mixture of cries, blows, whistles, and kicks. When I came to, I had been arrested. So had Timon. I wonder whether Malchus escaped. So now I was squatting in this darkness. I felt the pains in my body. But it was not just the bruises and the fetter that hurt. Something more made my limbs seize up. It was the humiliation through brute force and the fear of further humiliation to which I would be helplessly exposed. Guards were marching up and down outside. I heard voices. Someone opened the door. I was dragged out in fetters for interrogation, somewhere in the official residence of the Roman prefect in Jerusalem. An officer sat opposite me. A scribe took notes. "Do you speak Greek?" was the first question. "All educated people here speak Greek," I replied. The man who was interrogating me had clear-cut features. His watchful eyes inspected me in a penetrating way. In other circumstances, I might have liked the look of him. "What's your name?" "Andreas, son of John." "Where do you come from?" "Sepphoris, in Galilee." "Occupation?" "I deal in fruit and grain." The officer paused and waited for the scribe to write all this down with a scratchy pen. "What are you doing in Jerusalem?" he went on. "I've come up for Pentecost." He raised his head and looked me straight in the eye. "Why did you demonstrate against Pilate?" "I wasn't demonstrating, I just happened to get caught up in the demonstration." Should I have said that I had recognized an old acquaintance amongst the crowd of demonstrators? Certainly not. Barabbas was very hostile to Rome. He might well be on the wanted list. I couldn't be associated with him. "Do you claim that you didn't shout, 'No money for Pilate'?" "I've no idea what it's all about," I lied. The official laughed derisively. Everyone in Jerusalem at that time knew what the fuss was about: money. Pilate wanted to take from the temple treasury to build a new aqueduct for Jerusalem. "You ought to know better than to get mixed up with a crowd of demonstrators." "None of them were armed. It was all friendly until the soldiers intervened," I retorted hastily. "But the demonstration was against us Romans. That sort of thing is suspicious. Haven't you already been involved in clashes between Jews and non-Jews? Haven't we met before?" "What kind of clashes?" "Conflicts in our cities, in which hotheads of your age get involved. They start with stupid tricks and end up with street fights, as in Caesarea. My hometown, Sepphoris, is quiet. The inhabitants are mostly Jews, but they've had a Greek education." "Did you say Sepphoris? Weren't there also disturbances there? What about the revolt after the death of Herod? Your city was a real nest of terrorists," he shouted back to me. "That's not true. 33 years ago there was a rebellion against Romans and Herodians throughout Palestine. The rebels captured our city by a trick and forced the inhabitants to fight against the Romans. The city had to pay the penalty. The Roman general Quintilius Varus sent troops against it, stormed it, burned it, and either killed the inhabitants or sold them as slaves. It was a fearful catastrophe for our city. How could I get him off this subject? Not everyone had been killed or enslaved at that time. Some had managed to escape, including Barabbas's own father. Barabbas had often told me about it. Were they interrogating me because of him? But what could they know of our friendship? In any event, I had to distract him from anything connected with Barabbas. Once again, I stressed, all the inhabitants of Sepphoris had to pay for the rebellion. Even Varus soon met his end. Not long afterward he perished in Germany along with freed legions. And they liked that in Sepphoris. The officer's voice still sounded loud and angry. There was no one there to like it. They were all dead or in slavery. The city was a pile of ruins. It was rebuilt by Herod's son, Herod Antipas. He settled people there who were favourable to the Romans. My father also came to Sepphoris at that time. We are a new city. Ask the Galileans in the neighbourhood. Our city is thought to be friendly to the Romans. That's the Sepphoris I come from. We'll look into all that. Another question. What position does your family have in the city? My father is a decurion, a member of the council. Our city was organized like a Greek city. There was a civic assembly, a council, elections and city officials. I deliberately referred to this because I knew that the Romans gave support to the republican cities and the well-to-do in them. Your father must be rich if he is one of the decurions of Sepphoris. What's his profession? He deals in grain, as I do. Who does he deal with? Galilee supplies agricultural produce to the cities on the Mediterranean coast. Caesarea, Dor, Ptolemais, Tyre and Sidon. I've already provided the Roman cohorts in Caesarea with grain. We can check that. Do you have business dealings with Herod Antipas? Of course. He has the biggest estates in Galilee. He used to have his residence in Sepphoris. I often deal with his stewards. I noticed how interested the interrogating officer was in Herod Antipas. What do they think of Herod Antipas in Sepphoris? He can rely on us in the city, but people in the country still have reservations about the Herodians. The officer picked up a piece of paper. He seemed to read it through quickly, gave me a questioning look and went on. This is the report on the interrogation of your slave Timon. Some of it reads rather differently. Do you really claim that you are loyal supporters of Herod Antipas? I shuddered. They had interrogated Timon? Slaves were interrogated under torture. Timon could have said anything about me and my family. I felt the blood rush to my head and quivered all over in anger. Answer me. What do you have against Herod Antipas? We support his rule. All respectable people in Sepphoris and Tiberias support it, I asserted. Then why do people in your house mock him so much? What do you mean? Your slave says that you call him a degenerate king, a reed shaking in the wind, a fox. I laughed in relief. He was once to have been heir to King Herod, but Herod changed his will regularly. Antipas inherited neither kingly rank nor kingdom, not even the largest and best part, but only a quarter of it, Galilee and Perea. So now he dreams of possessing all of it one day? Suddenly there was silence in the room. Even the scribe had stopped writing and looked at me. Perhaps, at all events, he's dreamed of it, I replied. And what about the reed in the wind? I had the comforting feeling that Antipas had become more important than I was. Was the official trying to collect information about him? I continued, rather more confidently. The reed in the wind is the phrase people use for him. There was criticism 10 years ago when Antipas moved his capital from our city to Tiberias, a city he had founded in honor of the emperor. Of course, we in Sepphoris were unhappy about the transfer. Business is better in a capital than in the provinces, so there was a good deal of criticism of Antipas in Sepphoris. So what's that got to do with the reed in the wind? That came about because Antipas had coins minted in his new capital. Normally coins have portraits of rulers on them, but it is forbidden under Jewish law to depict human beings or animals, so Antipas chose a harmless emblem, one meant to signify his new capital by the Sea of Galilee, reeds, a reed waving in the wind. And now that is on his first coin, where otherwise his portrait would have been. So he is mocked as being a reed wavering in the wind between Sepphoris and Tiberias. Only between cities? Also between wives? You mean the affair with Herodias? Yes, his wavering between his first wife, the Nabatean princess, and Herodias. Isn't he also wavering between the Nabateans and the Romans? At any rate, he was married to a daughter of the king of Nabatea. No, Antipas is as pro-Roman through and through as his father Herod was. But how does that fit with the fact that he's a strict Jew? As you said, he won't have images. Nor will any Jew. Really? Your slave Timon told us there was a statue in one of the rooms of your house. That is a statue given to us by a Gentile business friend. We didn't want to hurt him by refusing the gift, I said in confusion. That's certainly interesting. You conceal statues of gods in your houses. Antipas himself has statues of animals in his palace, and as you know, his brother Philip even has a portrait of the emperor on his coins. Statues of animals? Is that really true? I've seen them myself. They're in his new palace in Tiberias. Well-to-do people are more lax in their own houses than in public over the Jewish laws. So how would it be if we spread rumors among the people that Antipas was practicing idolatry in secret and that some people in Sepphoris are not much better? Statues aren't gods. Statues are made by craftsmen. They're things like anything else. The fact that we have such things standing around at home doesn't mean that we're practicing idolatry. I don't understand. All the world worships the gods by means of statues. We shall never worship what has been made by human hands. God is invisible. It's impossible to make an image of him. God is not like the gods of the nations. The invisible God does not deal with the powerful, but with the outcast who are driven into the desert. I saw how the officer winced. Do you doubt that the gods are on the side of the Roman Empire? How could it have spread so far? How could a small city have become a whole empire? All nations think that the gods are on the side of the victors, but we know that the invisible God can be on the side of the losers. The officer looked at me with some concern. His voice sounded choked. There is something in your faith that rebels against earthly power. But you too will find your place in the Roman Empire like all other peoples. For it is our task to bring some order to the peace of the world, to spare the conquered, and to fight against the rebels, in this land and all over the world. After a brief pause, he added, Your case will take some time yet. We shall examine what you've said, and then decide whether charges are to be laid against you. And with that, I was dismissed. I was taken back to my cell. Now I had to wait. How long would it be before they completed their investigation of me? I was basically confident. I came from a well-to-do family that had good relations with the Romans, but there were moments of uncertainty. What else would Timon say? Would he keep his mouth shut about Barabbas? If my connections with Barabbas could be kept in the background, not much could really happen. Then I had gloomy forebodings. My fate seemed to be the forerunner of a gloomy destiny that would affect all our people. The tensions between Jews and Romans that led to the demonstration against Pilate would get greater and greater, to the point of open rebellion against the Romans. Untold misery, war, and oppression would come upon our land. Compared with this misery, the misfortune of my arrest was small. But there was not much comfort in that. In Pilate's dark prison, the time of waiting seemed infinitely long. It was a bad time for me.